thank you, Willie, and others. Where's Escape? I don't know how to use a PC.
Upper left.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And your presentation right here.
Okay.
I think that's it. No, other one over there. Schmitt.
There we go.
Click that.
That's my name.
Double click it. There you go.
Okay. What we're and where's our presentation? Here it is. Here it is. In order to have some time for questions, I'm going to leave my slides for the Heartland webpage and just make some general summary comments. First of all, I want to express my appreciation for all of you being here and for Heartland and other organizations making it possible that you're here to at least think about these issues in a somewhat more rational fashion than normally appears to be possible. I owe my own interest in this subject to my father and mother. When we moved to to just outside of Silver City, New Mexico, already a small town, my father's interest, long-term interest in meteorology began to take a more tangible form in that he began to record weather, precipitation, and enlisted my, I use the word enlisted my aid in measuring rainfall and dew point and a number of other facets of local weather in southwestern New Mexico. He also had discovered that there were records of the solar cycle and that there were records of precipitation in that part of New Mexico back to 1876 as a result of a local Army fort, Fort Bayard nearby. Some of the best records, actually, I think, in the United States were taken at these Army forts over a significant period of time. And he noted, being a geologist as well and used to making correlations of various kinds, that there was a very strong correlation between the 11-year solar cycle and precipitation in southwestern New Mexico. And we continued to keep those records for a number of decades. After that, after he died, my mother continued to do it. And as a result of my observations, 3 days of observations of Earth weather and descriptions of those observations, on my way to the moon, NOAA presented me not only with a public service award, but also with an official weather gauge. So my mother's station became an official station for a while in measuring precipitation in southwestern New Mexico. The reason I tell you this story is that I think many people throughout the country, in fact most, particularly I'd just say throughout the country, have an inherent interest in weather and over time an interest in climate. And we have to figure out a way to communicate our observations with their observations, to correlate with their observations. And it is extraordinarily important what we're about, what those of you here today and those of you who are the speakers are about, in that my primary concern, my overriding concern, is that this is just one of many major examples of where we are facing a loss of liberty in the United States of America and a loss of liberty throughout the world, because without the United States of America and its close allies throughout the world, liberty can very easily disappear. It has almost disappeared in the past, and it certainly can disappear in the future. There are many other issues where these concerns have to be raised in terms of how we deal with health care and government control of private activities, government control of education, and of course here we're talking about whether government can control climate change in one way or another. Now, scientifically, I'm out of place on this panel, and in fact out of place in any kind of discussion about climate change. I merely try, as I do in my own profession of lunar science and other areas of science, to synthesize the good work of others, try to evaluate it as best I can, and then talk to non-scientists as much as that is possible. Now, of course, that is very difficult, and except as Willie has done and others have done, if you go out and personally meet with people in various venues. Communicating to the mass of the American people through the national media is right now a nearly impossible task, as most of you have figured out. Now, politically, having spent one term in the United States Senate, I think I can say that there is a very, very strong tendency on the part of not only career elected officials, but appointed officials in government, wherever those governments may be, to seek increased power at the expense of individual liberty. That's the nature of legislation. If you examine almost any kind of legislation in modern times, there has been an attempt to increase power in one way and at the expense of individual liberty in another. And this cap and tax, cap and trade legislation that is trying to work its way through the United States Congress today is just another grasp for more power. And I think most of us in this room, I hope all of us in this room, recognize that. Now, I should also say that as an earth scientist, claims of consensus always make me a skeptic. As many have said, such claims of consensus usually mean an absence of definitive fact. And indeed, this is just another case. I would just draw some of your attention to the 1960s, when the consensus was that the idea of continents moving on the surface of the earth was impossible. Continental drift just couldn't have happened. That was the consensus. I was part of it. I was a student at Harvard in graduate school at the time, and that seemed like it made sense to me, in spite of a few odds and ends of fact that seemed a little bit inconsistent. Well, almost instantaneous, and indeed, during the same time we were having a revolution in our understanding of the moon and its relationship to the Earth, the early history of the Earth, there was a revolution in available fact. And plate tectonics, as it's now known, which would be continental drift in the old days, became the accepted consensus, and with a tremendous amount of fact to support it. And so it could no longer be really called consensus. It really is good theory, although many facts remain to be discovered. In my own profession, in the 1990s, a consensus developed that the moon was formed by a giant impact of a Mars-sized asteroid on a young Earth, the debris from which formed the moon. And that is still the dominant consensus, scientific consensus, within the university research community. A few of us contrarians are out there saying, but have you looked at the facts that are represented by what we discovered on the moon and from the analysis of samples that were returned from that small planet? The answer is not yet. And indeed, the facts would, I think, not support that consensus, but it is still being taught as the theory rather than hypothesis for the origins of the moon. So I'm a skeptic there as well. And now we have human-caused climate change. And as you've heard from many speakers, much more expert than I on this subject, there is good reason to say that the facts just do not support this hypothesis. Now let me conclude, and then we'll get to some questions, and I may participate there as well. Let me conclude by saying in the long term, the challenge, as indicated by many, the challenge is not producing less CO2, the human challenge on this planet. The challenge is in reality producing more energy. However we do that, that is the challenge. By 2050, just to stay even with population growth at current average use globally, you have to double the amount of energy supply just to stay even. And if you look at the aspirations of 3/4, 4/5 of the world's population, which do not live in the affluence that we do here and that most of our countries represented here live, then you're talking about at least a factor of 4 increase just to reach the levels of the United States today. That's a factor of 8 right there, an increase in energy supply in less than 50 years. And then you talk about mitigating the effects of actual climate change, natural climate change. If you want to do that, whether it's warming or cooling, it takes energy to mitigate those effects. And we aren't even working on that problem. We're putting all of our planning to put all our resources into fighting nature rather than learning how to live with it as we should. So my advice to everyone is to network. We're not going to make it through the national media for some time, but network with your mailing lists, your email lists, and begin to spread at the grassroots the message that this is something that's very serious, and it's serious because it means a loss of your liberty. Thank you very much, and look forward to questions.